everyone. Welcome to our first ever Power Hour. The sustainability department decided to do something new this year with considerations of how some folks are working from home, working remotely. So giving a good opportunity to learn from our subject matter experts at both Webcor and outside organizations and companies. And thank you for being here and being curious about this week's theme, which is waste. So I'm going to kick it over to Stefanie, who will start with a fun activity to test everyone's knowledge about recycling. And don't worry if it seems hard, I did not know all the answers myself.
Thanks, Maggie. Awesome. Yeah, excited to present to everyone this morning. Maggie, is there a way to see everybody else's faces, or do we just see the presenters' faces?
I believe with the Zoom webinar, we can only see the presenters' faces.
Okay, no worries. So in that case, yeah, everybody on the call, just feel free to provide a response to these questions and test yourself. I won't know if you get it right or wrong, so you will be the only person who knows. So yeah, this is a Recycling 101 quiz that I put together, and it's actually surprising how difficult it is to understand where each item needs to be recycled. It is not clear online, it's not clear with different companies, and it seems to kind of depend on your city and on the collector who collects all of the trash. So some of this you'll have to kind of look depending on your location, but I suddenly learned a lot through this and have tried to get our team on the Genesis Marina project that I'm working on, get everybody recycling. So yeah, curious to see how much everybody knows about recycling. On to question one, Maggie, if you could jump. Yep. So kind of put together a quiz. There's a number of questions we'll go through, and yeah, so take a moment to think, can toothpaste, cream, or empty ointment tubes be placed in recycling? So I'll give you guys a moment to think, and then I will give the answer. Yeah. So answer to this one is false. Even though these tubes are plastic, they actually cannot be recycled. And one is because they often are made of different types of plastic, and they often also contain some sort of metal layer in order to keep it fresh and clean. So these actually cannot be recycled, but we are doing a TerraCycle program where you can recycle oral care products, you can recycle toothbrushes, toothpaste cottons, packaging, floss containers. So feel free to reach out to myself or Adele. I know that, that she's also doing it at UC at HSIR. If you have any of these products, and we'll take them from you. But yeah, do not throw them in recycling. If you do not have a TerraCycle ability to access TerraCycle, then they would go in trash. Question two, envelopes with plastic windows are recyclable. True or false? So this one is actually true. I initially thought that you had to rip out the plastic window and then recycle them separately, but these actually can be recycled together. So yeah, on to the next question. Which cart do daily contact lenses go in? So green for compost, black for trash, blue for recycling. Now, dailies actually this is actually a trick question because it goes in none of these. So again, there is now a program that TerraCycle has partnered with Bosch and Lom, I think is the name of the company, and they will collect your daily boxes and then recycle those. So again, reach out to myself or Adele, yeah, if not, they go in the trash. So yeah, on to the next question. So plastic bags with the chasing arrow symbols are recyclable in the blue cart, true or false? So this question is actually true and false. Typically, so for plastic bags, if you just throw one plastic bag in the recycling, it cannot be recycled. Often it'll get caught in the machines. It's too small. It's kind of obstructive for the process. However, if you group your plastic bags together, like put a ton of them in a smaller plastic bag, like a basketball size, that you can put in your recycling and they'll recycle it. Or take it to, like, there's a Lucky's down the street from me that recycles plastic bags. I think a lot of retailers like Best Buy or Target, they also will have a collection point for plastic bags. Or just even better, avoid plastic bags altogether. Okay, question 5. Well, this is actually not a question. So this I put together. It's if anybody's noticed, whenever you get a plastic container, a takeaway container, or just any plastic whatsoever, there's always a symbol on the back. And the industry kind of, I think it's a way of tricking people to think that every plastic is recyclable, regardless of the number. In reality, though, I'd encourage you to pay attention to what the number is on the back. So really the only 2 plastic types that are widely recycled are 1 and 2. And you'll notice so often now when I look on the back of a container, it's like 5 or 6 or 7. And so those you can absolutely, you know, I'd say still put it in recycling, clean it, put it in recycling. But depending on where you live, those may not get recycled. So yeah, don't be fooled by the recycling sign. Question 5, utensils. Which cart do they go in? The blue cart or the black cart? Now, this kind of depends what county you're in. Typically, they're going to go in the garbage. If you're in San Francisco, however, apparently San Francisco does recycle these. So you can clean them and put them in. But just as a general rule, if it's a small plastic item, putting them in recycling, it's a difficult item to recycle. It's too small. But you know, a pro tip here is don't order plastic utensils. So when you order food for takeout, just ask for no utensils and use reusable cutlery. Question 6. Paper towels go in which cart? Compost, trash, or recycling? Now, this one we had a big discussion on site the other day as to where these need to go, because it's paper towel, not just paper. Paper towels go in compost, always. They can't really be recycled because the fibers are too short, is what I learned from research. So even if they dry, put them in compost. And typically paper towel gets dirty, right? It's got food on it. So they can absolutely go in the compost. Don't put them in the trash. Next question. Do or don't bag your recyclables. And I've seen my neighbors doing this. This is false. You do not want to bag your recyclables. One, it means that sometimes the crews will, when they pick up the bags, they don't know what's inside it. And so for safety reasons, they'll just throw it in the trash. Or 2, the plastic bags can get destroyed, caught up in the machines. So again, do not bag your recyclables. They should be loose. Next question. Where do you toss your dental floss? I just like this question because it rhymed. So dental floss actually is going to go in the trash. However, again, if you have the box, that's part of TerraCycle's recycling program. So those can be recycled. Next question, what do you do with dryer lint? Now, on one hand, I would have thought that would be composted. In reality, it goes in trash. Because it often contains synthetic fibers. So if you wear only cotton clothes, then it probably could go in the compost. Because most of us use synthetic materials, it's going to go in the trash. Padded envelopes, can they be recycled? And I know everybody receives a lot of Amazon packages. So this is a sad fact, but they cannot be recycled. You may have noticed that Amazon is rolling out padded envelopes that you can recycle. They're using like a different material. So if they like a brown and it's written you can recycle them. The yellow ones, however, you'd actually have to take out the bubble wrap and then put the bubble wrap in the trash or recycle it with your plastic bags and then recycle the paper separately. Shiny food wrappers, can they go in recycling? The answer to this one is no, unless, they would go in the trash, unless, again, you're partnered with, so TerraCycle has a program, and actually in my project, we have the TerraCycle box right now that's picking up any food wrappers, and this includes like candy bar wrappers, any sort of bar wrappers that they come in can be recycled through TerraCycle. So yeah, unless you have a TerraCycle program, those will go in the trash. And then this one came up because we use a lot of these on our project site, obviously to keep the area clean and sanitized. So can these be composted? And I looked this one up for a while. And in reality, they cannot be composted. And the reason for that is because most of these off-the-shelf wipes have synthetic fibers in them. So you know how they're like stretchy and you can use them quite vigorously. They actually take decades to decompose. So if you are ordering new products for your office, I'd recommend you can get compostable cleaning wipes. That's the image on the right. But if you're getting the typical kind of Clorox wipes, those go in the trash. Okay, and what about takeaway boxes? Now, this one also did a lot of research on it, and it's kind of unclear, I would say, and it depends on where you are. Here's my takeaway, and I'd be curious if anybody has more research or has more data, please share it with the group. So paper takeaway boxes can be composted. This photo right here underneath is from the Recology website. So these are items that would be composted. So anything that has food on it and is paper. If they're plastic boxes, wash them, then recycle them. And again, check the arrow on the underside of it. Check the number and the arrows. And ice cream cartons would go in recycling once they're cleaned. Okay, so some general rules of thumb to kind of wrap it up for everybody is if it's plastic, clean and dry, you're going to recycle it with some exceptions, obviously. If it's a plastic bag, you're going to group and recycle it. If it's paper, you're going to recycle it. If the paper is dirty or soiled, or if it's paper towel, compost it. Food, compost it. And anything else, take it to the trash. Awesome. And then this is just kind of a plug of the items right now that we are recycling. So reach out to like my job if you want to get involved with these programs. These are kind of lists of the products as mentioned during the quiz that we are currently collecting and sending to TerraCycle, who is recycling these.
Great, thank you so much, Stefanie.
Thank you.
What a wealth of knowledge, and we'll be sure to share these facts and resources with you throughout the month, so you can quiz your own team members. I think it's great, great little quiz that you can just take and share with your teams. Quick reminder, feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A box throughout everyone's presentations, and we'll have time at the end to answer them. All right, we're going to hand it over next to Adele, which is a great transition. Stefanie mentioned a few things about TerraCycle. So Adele's going to speak a little bit about that.
Hi everyone, I'm Adele, and I'm going to be talking today about a lot of TerraCycle efforts. Next slide. So like Stefanie was talking about, we do a lot of TerraCycle recycling. A lot of people don't know too much about this company, but their name is actually getting a little bit more traction nowadays. What's interesting is currently they partnered up with Nordstrom, and you can actually recycle your beauty products there. Doesn't have to be just eyeshadow cases or girly things. Like they also do like moisturizer tubes and things like that that everyone kind of uses. So that's a great way to get rid of trash without actually throwing it in the landfills. So why I got interested in TerraCycle is because I was trying to figure out how to recycle things that currently Recology doesn't. So I live in San Francisco, and every week I would look through my trash and be like, why can't I recycle this? And then I found this company that does. So what's neat is that TerraCycle actually has free programs. So if you go on their website, you can actually sign up to take part in their free programs. And you just need to find like a drop-off bin or send it in. So to be sustainable, they require a certain amount of pounds in order to mail it. So it's good to collect with like your job sites, your offices or friends or whatnot, and then send it all together. And they pretty much recycle anything. It's actually pretty interesting, the snack wrappers and PPE. And what's great is that they are international, but for the US facilities, they actually keep the products here in the US. And I actually had to email them about that because I was very curious on, are we supporting this company that is shipping things out to Asia or something like that to get it processed? But they actually do things here, which is great. It gives our people jobs and keeps everything local. So that's really great. Some of the things that they do recycle that Steph didn't talk about is coffee bags. So currently the main office in San Francisco, we're doing that. I think we collected like 8 pounds or something last year. They collect juice pouches and Ziploc bags as well. But again, the best thing to do is not really use Ziploc bags, but if you do, there are ways to actually recycle them. Next slide. So this is a little small, but this was some green team data that we had from our recent scavenger hunt. So for the scavenger hunt, we collected a few different types of items like PPE, batteries, things that people could find at home, and they couldn't really recycle it at home. So we brought everyone together, they searched their houses, and they turned in whatever they could find. So again, the box on the left is a TerraCycle box. They ship you out a cardboard box with a liner just in case something leaks. And then you fill it to its capacity and you just mail it by FedEx or UPS. It has a prepaid label on there and you just slap it and just send it in. As for the batteries, so actually Recology, San Francisco, and actually I think all of the Recologies recycle the batteries. What you can do is you can put it in a bag on top of your trash can if you live in San Francisco. I know that for sure, and they will take it. And if you live in apartment complexes, they actually deliver buckets. So I have this inside of my trash area. And so I've been just taking whatever I have at the job site and just throwing it in there at home because it's really easy. Other things to think about is a lot of other companies like Best Buy and other big companies like that are actually partnering with different programs to recycle their items. So Best Buy, you can recycle some of the e-waste, smaller e-waste, things that you have at home, old cell phones and whatnot. BIC, the pen company, is actually doing pen recycling, and we actually collected 7 pounds of it. Old pens, you see them lying around the job sites all the time. And for, like Steph mentioned, the contact lens blister packs, those are actually a huge thing because a lot of people use dailies. And if you collect your dailies for a year, you'll see how much trash you really contributed to the landfill. So if you have any questions about where to recycle things, please reach out because there's a lot of different programs that not too many people know about, and you really have to dig for it. But since we have the information, we'll be happy to share it with you. And that's it, Maggie.
Thanks so much, Adele. Yeah, as Adele mentioned, this recycling scavenger hunt was a month-long campaign, but we do want to continue this throughout the year. So let us know how we can help support you in doing that, as in the sustainability department. Okay, moving on. Up next, we have Brock from Premier to talk to us about the state of the construction industry, construction waste industry. So
hi, thanks so much for having me. So my name is Brock Hill, Vice President of Premier Recycle Company and Vice President of the Construction Demolition Recycling Association. Our company works on many of your projects here up in the Bay Area. And so it's been a pleasure working with you all. Thank you very much. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the changes in the waste industry right now, specific to C&D waste. Material generation continues to remain high. And that was kind of something as a shock to us, because in the first downturn, when most projects shut down, we almost went to zero. But the second they started bumping up the requirements for the construction sites, we saw material shooting through the roof. And it was more than a regular amount to us. We were having some of the busiest days we ever had. And I think it was due to a push to finish projects before a possible anticipated downturn. It's the only thing we can correlate it to. I asked other industry colleagues and they saw the same thing, especially here in the Bay Area. The material composition has also changed. As new construction slowed to a halt, what we saw was a lot of generation of TI material. And material from TI jobs is generally lower in diversion. So we see the non-recyclable carpet, ceiling, or carpet tiles, ceiling tiles, vinyl, insulation, all of which can't be recycled, and we saw a lot more of that. The next trend we're seeing is mass timber. Now, right now, it's touted as more sustainable and kind of the hot rage right now with architects. The mass timber projects that we're working on right now generate much more plastic than normal construction. And this is due to how the mass timber itself is wrapped and prefabricated before it gets to the job site. So although we're not seeing as much wood waste from those projects, we're seeing a lot more PVC wrapping. The next is modular buildings. And this is kind of the same problem with mass timber. You know, we've got a much smaller amount of waste, entirely almost plastic, non-recyclable PVC wrapping To give you an example, we did a project in Berkeley with a company doing a modular building, and they produced about 5% of the amount of weight that we would typically see off a project of that size, but they also got less than a 10% diversion rate on that project. What we had to do is go back and advocate to the city of Berkeley to show overall sustainability, not just based on weight like the cities are used to seeing. So if you're approaching these type of projects, that's something you want to keep in mind, at least on the sustainability team, that you may have to go to bat for your project because the city doesn't quite understand what you're trying to achieve. There's also changes that are happening in LEED and Living Building Challenge. In version 4.1, LEED has decreased the allowable points for construction waste. And this was a trade-off in dealing with our industry and the USGBC to decrease the amount of source separation for tight lot line projects, especially that you see in the city of San Francisco, but also gave you another point for going to a third-party certified facility. So they're accurate diversion rates, and they let you do a little bit less source separation because you frankly just don't have the room on those type of projects. With LBC specifically, there's challenges because it was designed for residences and small projects. Mainly the requirement to recycle all the carpet, foam, and insulation 100%. So we're working with LBC and their team there to figure out a way of how to do this on larger projects. Does that requirement work? Does it not? So the feedback is still in progress right now. Moving on to the realities of recyclability of material. Mixed facilities usually get the tailings after the metal and the concrete are removed by either the GC or the subs on site, and a lot due to source separation. And we found as drywall manufacturers start to get involved, mainly due to the work of the closed loop project, taking drywall back to the manufacturers themselves, mixed facilities are getting really the trailings and the hard to recycle things at the end of the day. So you're going to see mixed facilities diversion rates going down over time, but that's not necessarily a bad thing as overall diversion rates are up. So a little bit about markets right now. We've got in California the loss of the cogen power plants. And this is due to the subsidies on solar. They couldn't afford to compete. And there was also a push by environmental groups to eliminate emissions from these plants. But C&D wood was the main driver of these power plants to try and keep it out of the landfills, but it's too dirty for mulch. And a lot of that mulch is used on the side of highways, or the very clean dimensional lumber that's ground up can be used in playgrounds, but you have to make it to a real high spec. So most of the C&D wood ended up in these cogen power plants. So what do? Try to get creative on making alternate products like biochar, which is the next slide. So biochar is something that's being greatly talked about in our industry right now as an alternative to sending it to cogen power plants. It's 70% carbon by weight. And the way that you produce it is you produce it by high heat in a very low oxygen environment. They make mobile units that we can put out at sorting facilities around the country, or you could actually, if you could get the air permit for it, do it on the job site. You see it a lot in the Central Valley right now to eliminate open burning. A lot of wineries use these type of machines. But what you end up with is something kind of like charcoal you use in a barbecue. In the past, that was just kind of thrown away. But really what they found is that this has been used for thousands of years as a natural fertilizer because of the surface area. So if you can see on the right side of that photo, that's a microscopic picture of the biochar itself. And the surface area is gigantic. It can hold about 2,000 times its weight in water. And so the CDRA is doing studies on biochar to see if it can be used as a attenuator of H2S gas, heavy metals, and PFAS. So we're doing studies right now to see if the biochar can actually be put into landfills to go ahead and absorb that type of leachate before it actually ever touches the ground, and hopefully not. Next slide, please. C&D fines remains the largest hurdle. Despite more source separation, you're still going to get it. And this is just every little speck of rocks, dust, wood, everything that's very small. Every facility is going to have this issue, whether mechanized or hand sort. You end up with these fines at the end of the day. Currently, they're used as ADC, and the CDRA is heavily invested in researching different processing ways to create a marketable form of this product instead of ADC. So we're trying to figure out what to do with it. You know, can you make it clean fill right now? No, because it's got a lot of plastic in it, etc. But we're trying to figure out a market for that material, which is a large component of facility diversion at the moment. Next slide. Treated wood. I know you don't do a lot of residential, smaller residential, but it still is an issue on some projects. Is January 1st of this year, there was a total ban on treated wood from going both to sorting facilities and to landfills. Essentially gave no outlet for it at all. Projects didn't know what to do with it. Haulers didn't know what to do with it. Landfills couldn't take it. We were all facing heavy fines for even having it in our facilities. But the problem was it was still being sold. It was still out there. Decking and fencing contractors were still generating it every day. So at least us in California got together and said, we have to do something about this. So we got the Department of Toxic Substances to issue variances to facilities and landfills. So at least for the time being, we could still operate as normal until we can get our ultimate fix in. And the fix, through a lot of hard work, is AB 332, which just passed through committee yesterday, now going to the California Appropriations Committee. And hopefully this can get passed as a permanent fix soon. But it's still in a state of flux, but most facilities have their variances right now. So you should see it moving to how it was prior to January 1st. So some of the regulations.
So Brock, real quick, I'd like to answer a question live really
Sure.
quickly. Can you further explain what ABC is?
Oh, sorry about that. That was inside baseball. It's alternative daily cover. And so there's a federal law that you have to cover the landfill at the end of the night every single day. So you don't get seagulls in there, you don't get vectors, it doesn't smell. So in the past, you used to use virgin dirt for that. Now, virgin dirt, a lot of times here is hard to come by. So they allowed something called alternative daily cover to put on top of the landfill. And that's what C&D fines are typically used as right now in lieu of virgin dirt. They're really, even though it still ends up into the landfill, they consider it a beneficial use. I'm not a huge fan of classifying it as diversion, but it's the only way some projects ever hit that 65%. It's kind of an accounting trick. Hopefully it'll end at some point, but there is no other use for that material at the moment. Hopefully I answered the question.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. And then regulations for the Bay Area, what we're seeing is third-party certification being pushed by cities like San Francisco. And third-party certification is certification of recycling rates that are truthful and accurate to an ISO 14000 standard for sorting facilities. So it doesn't mandate you have to hit a certain level. It just says, this is what it is, and this is true, no matter the diversion rate. And you can find that, it's public knowledge on recyclingcertification.org. The Bay Area has a lot of exclusive franchises. So if you're building in the city of Mountain View, for instance, you don't have a choice other than to use who the city tells you to use, and you don't have a choice on where it goes. So you don't have very much freedom in terms of how you recycle your material. If you want to get creative, you can't. So there's pushback from contractors finally on these exclusive franchises because more things have become recyclable. So that's good, but in the Bay Area, that still exists, and I would say that's a problem for projects. There's heavy use of green halo now, which is the project teams will probably be familiar with this, where you have to take the hauler tickets and the facility tickets and input them into this system that the city can then go ahead and check, are you on track to recycle at the 65% or are you not? Unfortunately, what you're going to see is with third-party certified facilities popping up, especially around the Bay Area, more so because of San Francisco, you're going to see that those rates input into Green Halo tend to be on the lower side for third-party certified facilities because those rates are true. If you see tickets that are above that, they might be in question. But as for the third-party certified facilities, it's automatically linked up to Green Halo and makes your job a lot easier. There is also, from the city of San Francisco and Alameda County, they're pushing for a statewide certification for all facilities and a landfill ban on direct to landfill hauls. So what this is trying to do is encourage C&D to be hauled to a sorting facility first before the landfill. So probably hit demolition companies the hardest is they're not going to be hauling to the landfill straight anymore. If this goes through, they'll have to take it to a sorting facility. So in contrast with Southern California, they have many different city regulations that really don't line up with each other sometimes. And they have regs on the books that conflict, but they rely on the Cal Green codes. So your 65% mark is really what every city sets as their baseline. But if you're talking hauling franchises, which most of them are open, then that's a good thing. It leads to competition. But as far as your building permits, what you have to recycle, how you do it is all over the board in Southern California. There's not as many third parties certified facilities. It is rare at the moment, but there's a push within our industry to make that happen. Because there aren't any certified facilities that have the rates, they're reliant upon Los Angeles certified diversion rates. They're self-reported, they're not verified, and there's rampant misreporting. So our industry is trying to clean this up and get a more standardized approach. So I thought it'd be interesting if I actually took a look at Webcor's impact specifically with our company since 2013. And I know this is pretty small, but overall, every project you've done with our company together has earned a 78% recycling rate. And if you look at the bottom there, we've done some calculations based on the EPA WARM model to figure out what the actual impact would be. And your impact is 4,852 cars eliminated off of the road, just recycling the material with us and the data that we have. So that's a huge achievement, and it's nice to see it in a tangible way. So, what could you do on site to make your projects more successful? I say the first step is with a good construction waste management plan. These are mandated by a lot of cities, and I see a lot of boilerplate ones come through our table. And when you just hand that to a project team, they look at it, their eyes glaze over, and they say, okay, cool, somebody else will handle that. But when you have a very well-written plan, it's straightforward, it's simple, and it helps the projects teams actually know what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to do it, and where stuff goes. We've seen massive success with waste management plans that are written well specifically for the project that are not boilerplate. Simpler is better. Your team will thank you for the clarity, but strict management of these waste plans by the GC is necessary. If you allow the subs to handle it, it goes off the rails. So I would say keeping it tight within the GC is the best way to go for that. Also, you could join with like-minded organizations, such as the CDRA. We're actually looking for GC members to give their input on what's happening out in the field. We see your materials, so we see ourselves as more or less a construction subcontractor, but by aligning our two goals together, I think we'll really push the industry forward. We're not as separated as I think people think we are, because we're handling your material. So I think it's in everybody's best interest to work together. And the next thing you could do is contact your recycling facility for a tour. I think everybody's happy to show off. We're happy to show off. Anytime you want to come down, you're more than welcome anytime. And I would probably say the same for any facility out there, Northern California, Southern California, and they'd be happy to meet you. So with that, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Brock. And I saw a few questions coming in, but we'll make sure to answer them at the end, or if we run out of time, we'll give those questions to the respective presenters and make sure that they get answered for you.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, moving on to our mass timber presentation from our Webcor SMEs. Ryan and I believe, I'm not sure Allison is here, but and Greg are here.
Yeah, no, thanks, Megan. Thanks for having us today. Yeah, so you've got myself and Greg Arnold this morning. Allison McCue, I want to thank her for all the effort she put into helping us compile the information, but congratulations to her. She's not here today because she just welcomed a new family member. So and that you're stuck with just Greg and I today. But thanks for having us to provide a general overview of mass timber. And we want to kind of focus on, the harvesting and manufacturing process, as well as how the utilization of mass timber on our projects in the future could lead to us seeing a reduction in the aggregated amount of waste that's actually generated on our sites. So mass timber, I think, some people commonly think of like the large single timber elements that you would see in very old structures, large beams, large columns. But today's mass timber products are really created by layering a bunch of smaller dimensional lumber in a way that achieves stronger members, but also uses less material to create. So there's a lot of different types. The kind of most common that everybody sees, or we've been seeing in all of our pre-construction efforts right now, is CLT, which is cross-laminated timber. It's kind of the most optimized to gain two-way strength. But there's also glue laminated timber, nail laminated timber, dowel laminated timber, mass plywood, which sounds exactly like what it is, as well as glue lam itself, which is also pretty common. We see a combination of glue lam and CLT in most of the things we're looking at in pre-construction. Today, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Today, we're going to kind of focus in on the CLT because it is the most common one we're kind of seeing on every project right now. And it's basically what you can see in that kind of lower right-hand picture. It is a mass timber element that gains a lot of its strength by cross-laminating dimensional lumber both directions, right, in a major axis and a minor axis. So this way, the timber industry can utilize smaller dimensional lumber. Sometimes this is 2x6s, kind of common dimensional lumber that we would see in construction in general, but just putting it together in a way that optimizes its strength. Wood is anisotropic, meaning that its physical properties change depending on which axis you're applying force. So by laminating it perpendicular, we can essentially replicate a two-way concrete slab. So what we commonly see as formed post-tension slabs or even two-way mild steel slabs can be replicated through the use of laminated timber. And at the same time, it does give us an architectural element that allows for an exposed soffit. We're seeing in most of the designs now that the top of the slab is still getting a small concrete cap on it, mostly for acoustics, but also for concealing some of the in-slab electrical that we would typically see within our concrete slabs. But it does allow us the opportunity to leave open ceilings, which is another reduction in materials sometime without adding in T-bar and drop ceilings or covering with drywall. Go to the next slide, please. So timber, in talking about it from a sustainability standpoint, a lot of times kind of perks people's ears a little bit. People kind of think about, logging or deforestation, but that's really not what we're talking about within the timber industry and what is being used to create these mass timber elements. It's really more similar to farming of timber, where there's a very thorough process of understanding the growth cycles, replanting, access to areas for harvesting, and really turning it into a farming cycle rather than a logging operation. Most of the common species we see being used are conifer species, such as Douglas fir, spruce, pine, hemlock. There are others out there as well, but these are the main ones, mostly because they have an excellent strength to weight ratio and are also just aesthetically sound. They're not very knotty. They have a pretty consistent color to them. So you can really lean on that aesthetic side of it. There are many regulatory groups and certification programs. Most commonly, or probably most notable, is the FSC, or the Forest Stewardship Council certification. And really, it's all to ensure that the requirements are being met for minimal impacts, both from harvesting and from replanting. Anywhere from the access roads that are being cut in to how the land is being used during the time of growth. A lot of the areas can be utilized for outdoor recreation as long as it's planned out properly. So it's really a very long-term planning around the harvest of the lumber. There's also a lot of local regulations. Oregon seems to be leading the charge somewhat, as well as Washington, on really pushing the bounds on what's required in order to maintain the sustainable harvesting of the lumber. Next slide, please. So after harvesting, the two main steps before you get into actually having a product that's ready to use is milling and drying. So once the raw material is harvested, it needs to be brought to a facility for milling. It can get down to a size and a shape. Sorry, I think getting a lot of background noise. Greg, that might be in your office. Thanks. Getting it down to a size and shape that best allows for drying. The drying process is kind of twofold. It's to lower the moisture content so that one, it creates a more dimensionally stable product. So you're not seeing a bunch of change in size and shape once you have a piece, fabricated that you're going to use for construction. But it also reduces the moisture that would otherwise impede the proper gluing that is going to happen in the subsequent manufacturing processes that Greg will dive into a little bit here soon. Something that's notable that a lot of the industry is doing in the milling process is a facilities such as Nordic is a prime example of a mass timber manufacturer that's minimizing the impact of the harvesting to milling process by harvesting from very local growths. They're basically building their mills and setting up their mills in the area where they're harvesting from. So there's little to almost no shipping required to get from raw harvested material to the mill. There's also a lot going into the effort of using the biomass waste that's generated. So there's going to be some necessary offcuts from the milling process and materials that are being taken from the raw harvested material that can't be utilized in the actual final product. They're using those cutoffs to generate steam in their plants, power plants, to in turn create the electricity that's being used for the drying facilities. So it's not really a reduction of the waste, but it's at least a reutilization of those materials. So once the material's kiln dried, milled down to appropriate shape and kiln dried, we'll move into the next step, which is step 3 of visual inspections and strength grading. So Greg, if you want to step in.
Here. Thanks, Ryan. So after that initial drying sequence, there's actually a final milling to bring the wood to its proper dimension, and you don't want to do your final milling until it's dimensionally stable, which is achieved through the drying process. And much like a lot of manufacturing industries these days, a lot of screening and artificial intelligence operations are being utilized. And what they essentially do is screen the wood, understand where the weak spots are, where the knots are, classify, sort, trim as necessary so that only acceptable wood ends up in the CLT panel, which for obvious reasons is important. So, and like Ryan alluded to, the waste, the cutoffs, certain facilities can feed those directly into the cogeneration power plant. So next slide, please. So a German glue manufacturer, Henkel, produces a product called Loctite HB X Pure Bond, which coincidentally is used in about 95% of CLT that's manufactured globally. The benefits of this glue are listed below. So it's a one component system, meaning that the manufacturing plants don't have to do batching or mixing. So that's obviously beneficial for reducing human error. And also because it's 100% solids, there's not entrained liquid, meaning that there's less product that needs to be shipped to the manufacturing facility. As well, it has zero formaldehyde or solvents. So the off-gassing that comes from this glue-up product or this production, it's very minimal. In fact, it actually is not detectable by human air quality standards. It's UL Green Guard Gold certified. So another advantage of this is that it's what sets the process off is not reliant upon heat or energy. it's actually the moisture, the residual moisture, which is 8 to 12% in the wood product, facilitates the glue bond. And the Hinkle engineers, they're pretty crafty. They've developed, depending on your manufacturing process and how much time you need of open time to get racked up, the curing time is about 3 times whatever the open time is. So it incentivizes the manufacturers to rack up as quickly as possible. And, you know, given the technology, they can do it. I think like it can happen as quickly as 3 minutes. And that means that you are fully cooked in 10, so, or 12 minutes if you're including the rack up time. So anyways, next slide, please. So there's 2 ways to apply the pressure. There's the vacuum press and the pneumatic press. The vacuum press is used typically when there's a curve component where you need to build a form or something to apply pressure to, because the vacuum press does an excellent job of applying 3-dimensional force. Typically, like a high production facility is going to use a pneumatic press, which is a picture on the lower right-hand side. Next slide, please. So some good little factoids regarding CLT and mass timber in general is that manufacturing is done to tight tolerances with CNC equipment. So when it ships to the site, the offcuts and waste that typically end up inside the debris bins is non-existent. And then they can actually be fed into the cogeneration facility, as we mentioned earlier. And as Ryan said, considering mass timber's pleasing appearance, you know, it's not oftentimes covered up in metal stud framing, drop ceilings, sheetrock paint, and those materials can be actually left out altogether. So, next slide, please. So some interesting, fun factoids. 1 cubic yard of concrete creates 400 pounds of CO2, and that's from the Portland Cement Association. 1 cubic meter of wood has the potential to sequester 1 ton of CO2. Typical concrete and steel buildings has an emission profile of 2,000 metric tons of CO2. Inversely, a mass timber building could potentially sequester that same amount of CO2. Globally, the building industry contributes to about 40% of CO2 emissions. And, you know, that speaks to our obligation to do a better job reducing our CO2 emissions as an industry. At the end of a building's life cycle, much like a barn structure in the Midwest, those timber components can be reused. They disassemble just as quickly as they assemble, which is typically with just screws. So those components can be repurposed down the line when the building life cycle has reached its end. And then another interesting factoid is that we're becoming an increasingly urban society. So figuring out a way to build more sustainable high rises is ultimately better for the planet. So, and with that, that wraps up our presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Greg and Ryan, and congratulations to Allison on her new family member as well. Again, any questions that are going to come in, we'll try to get to at the end. So thank you very much for your presentation. And then last but not least, we have Joe Bell to talk us through a new exciting tool that we've started to develop. So Joe, take it away.
All right. So this is something that we've been investigating for the last couple of months with some feedback from some of the operational folks within the company. So the idea is that when we're on a job site, there's oftentimes perfectly good materials or sometimes even tools or consumables that are perfectly fine and can be used somewhere else. So next slide, Maggie. So one of the things we wanted to highlight was that there's a huge opportunity within the construction industry to affect sort of a reduction in waste, which I think we've seen a lot of opportunities throughout this hour. But of all of the waste generated in the United States every year, construction accounts for about a third of it. And that's a huge opportunity, right? So next slide. And then some of the things that are happening locally, I know within San Francisco, a fair amount of us live either in San Francisco or in the Bay Area. A lot of the goals are to kind of reduce waste, you know, progressively down to zero, right? As close as possible to zero. So this is a little small piece of our big pie that we're trying to come up with a efficient solution for. We're still in the process of it, but again, so just highlighting some of the opportunities that we have to do this. So next slide. So there within the Webcor intranet is the sustainability dashboard, and you can go in and look at our waste diversion rate for the year, and it even breaks it down by project, and you'll see some outliers in the data, which is attributed to when we have a large demolition activity on a project. But you can see that of the amount of waste that was diverted from landfills throughout the year, there's still a ton of waste that doesn't get diverted from landfills. So next slide. There's another view of the sustainability dashboard, just highlighting the opportunity. So the little green line at the bottom of the graph is the opportunity to reduce that or increase that diversion rate even more. It looks very small, but it's actually many, many, many tons every year. And then next slide. So current process and challenges. So this was some feedback that we got from primarily superintendents in the superintendent meeting a while back. So where do surplus materials go? Sometimes carpenters, laborers, or folks on the job will take surplus building materials home as long as they're extra and, you know, it doesn't take away from work that's being put in place to do home projects. Sometimes it'll make it to a donation bin or a donation facility. But oftentimes we try to get these materials or consumables or tools to other projects. So in the past, this hasn't been executed very consistently. So some of the things that we came up with that was holding us back: lack of storage, lack of time, no central location to list and track surplus materials. And then oftentimes there's no point person to consistently coordinate how these things happen and how these surplus materials end up on other jobs or in places where they can be reused. And then the next slide is, so this is just a small little case study from a project that I worked on. So these are just photos of things that were left over at the end of jobs. And you'll see something that's near and dear to Webcor's heart is tools, right? Because we own and supply a lot of our own tools. But sometimes we end up with tools that are not from Webcor or that Paramount Builders doesn't want to take back. So here are some photos of things that were left over at 2465 Van Ness that were either slightly damaged and we didn't want to send back to the yards, but could still be used, or didn't belong to us but got left there and we were expected to just throw away. So we have tools, we have consumables, we also have surplus building materials, things that might be very useful to some people but not useful to the project anymore. And so some examples of that, so obviously tools left by subcontractors, snow shovels, push brooms, single-use tools that are, you know, might be beneficial to a project that aren't beneficial to this project anymore. But then we end up with red flagging, yellow flagging, floor protection, screws, nails, things that can easily be used that would otherwise be thrown away. And then when it comes to the building materials, oftentimes I think we probably end up with plywood and 2x4s and lumber, And that often will go from job to job as long as a job has an opportunity and the ability to take it and store it. And then sometimes we end with things like paint. Paint is very specific to a certain project, but I'm sure other people can use it if you're doing a temporary office and you don't necessarily care about the color of the paint. So we figured there's an opportunity here to try and eliminate some of these items from the waste stream. So we had an idea to kind of create what we're calling maybe a Webcor Craigslist, and so we're still investigating that. So next slide. So the next steps that we'd like to take. So there's 3 primary things we want to do. So we want to quantify the opportunity, understand the challenges, right? We recognize that there's an opportunity here. We recognize that there's some challenges to potentially implementing a solution. And we want to make sure that the problem does exist and needs to be fixed. And if it needs to be fixed, can we come up with a solution that tackles the problem? We're working on piloting a potential solution. Again, we're kind of treating it like a Webcor Craigslist. Hey, can we advertise across all of the platforms that Webcor has within its company to find opportunities to reuse materials and tools or things that don't fit within the normal categories within Webcor. Obviously, tools primarily belong to Webcor and Paramount and need to go through the proper channels, but sometimes we end up with a few that slip through and don't fit into the categories that we normally have. And then lastly, we want to create and implement a process and a solution, but we want to make sure that the effort, it doesn't cost more to do it than the benefit of the solution. So we're going to take this a bit farther. It's still in its infancy, and this is something that we're going to explore. So look for something in the future. And that's all I got.
Thanks so much, Joe. Exciting stuff happening at Webcor and at other companies too, like Premier. So thank you for sharing, and thank you everyone. Looks like most of the questions have been answered by our presenters. Before we get into that in the last 2 minutes, I want to quickly make a shameless plug for more Earth Month related reminders. If you haven't already, please add your personal and/or team Planet Pledge to our virtual Planet Pledge board on Miro. Someone within your team or department should have a link to the board. I can also share that with you if you don't have access still. It can be an environmental or wellness focused goal or commitment that you really want to do for yourself as well as for the environment for this month. So I encourage you to add your pledges if you haven't done so already. And this is what the whole board looks like. And shout out to Mission Rock for filling out their personal pledges and team pledges. So that's what it should look like. And hopefully we can see the whole board filled this week or next. And then one last thing, we have a Earth Month team on Microsoft Teams, and that is a great way that you can engage and provide updates, photos, write how your Planet Pledges are going. We want you to stay engaged in that channel, and there can be prizes for that as well. So one quick question. Oh, I believe that all of our questions have actually been answered then. So great, and thank you for your comment, Matt. We appreciate the feedback. One last thing before we all head out. Again, big thanks to all of our presenters. The recording will be shared shortly, and I'll make sure that you all have access to the video and any questions and comments. And a survey will be sent out after. If you answer the survey, you will also be entered into a raffle for some Earth Month related prizes. So be sure to take 2 quick minutes to fill out the survey. We are at time, so thank you all again and have a great day.